This is not a drill. We have rules for Warhammer Underworlds, a bunch of different editions, warbands in Warcry. In case you missed it, we've actually had them for a hot second now, but about 2 weeks they started being on sale in Germany a little while ago. But I'm here with a guide for all six of them and using them in Warcry. And they're incredibly important for a bunch of reasons. So, for if you don't know, Bladeborn, which is a Barnes& and Noble exclusive board game that Games Workshop is making. It's gone on sale in Germany. In the German edition, ships with Warcry rules for 6 different Underworlds warbands. And they're incredible for anyone who wants to get into Warcry on a budget. Because the amount of points that they're pointed at, any two Underworlds warbands that are in this list can be combined to just make one Warcry warband, which is amazing for getting into the game. Or you can do something like just get one of the warbands and some chaff models, and you've got your hero-sized unit, you've got a few different variety sort of utility units, and you have sort of a whole variable, interesting warband with just 2 boxes that you've purchased. That's it. So I'm going to give kind of a general overview of each of the different Underworlds warbands in the game, what they're going to play like, which fighters you might be most interested in, and then also talk about how you can use them to get into Warcry on the tightest budget possible. I'm also incredibly excited about this because, this is total baseless speculation here, but I think we're much more likely to get either all of the Underworlds warbands in the future or possibly just Warcry rules for all of the Harrow Deep warbands, all the ones going forward in the new edition. We'll see what we actually get, but I'm pretty hopeful. I'm pretty hopeful that as the Red Harvest box comes in, I think we might get more rules along with that. So let's start with the Eyes of the Nine. This is the Tzeentch warband, if you remember a few seasons ago. Um, Comes with a Vortimus, who is sort of a wizard character, and then a bunch of different sort of smorgasbord of Tzeentch units. A couple Arcanists, a couple, or one Zangor, a couple Horrors. And it's kind of interesting in Warcry. Most of them have a pretty rough go of it, actually, in this one. This is the weakest of the six. The blue horror is the same as what the demons pay for a blue horror, but or get for it, but 10 more, 10 points more expensive. Narvia and Tarash, these are the acolytes here. They kind of compare unfavorably to most of the acolytes that you get. Specifically, the one with the bird is really good. Most of the acolytes are weaker as well, but Narvi and Tarash really aren't lighting up the stage at all. And then Vortimus is actually kind of okay as far as mages go. Um, don't love him, but he is better than a Magister or a Gaunt Summoner. The issue is that if you're playing Tzeentch, Enlightened and Skyfire leaders are incredible, and it's just really hard to, stray away from that. Now, you of course can if you really love Vortimus, but you know, if you've got any Enlightened or a Skyfire at all, you're probably going to go that direction. The interesting one though is Kacharek. Uh, he's sort of built as being halfway between a Zangor Enlightened and a normal Zangor, which I think is really cool. It's this kind of space in terms of sizing that Tzeentch just didn't have access to before, sort of a fighter at this size, sort of weight class, if you will. Um, Now, he's slightly less points efficient than either one, but I think he makes up for it with a really interesting ability. So he can add half the value of the ability, so the dice roll, rounded up, to the amount of damage done by normal and crit hits during the next attack action. Range characteristic 3 or less, but that's what his attack is. Um, it's a lot like Guided by the Past, which is what Zangors do, except it's a little more flexible. Guided by the Past, you can only do against a fighter who's already gone. So they have a chance to, take a smack at the Enlightened, something like that. You also can't do it to finish off a unit before it gets to activate, which is tactically one of the things in Warcry that you want to be doing most often. Um, Kacharek can do all that. It's got more flexibility there. So I do think that, you know, if you are sort of obsessed with Tzeentch in Warcry, or if you love Tzeentch in general, I do think the Eyes of the Nine are worth picking up in Warcry just for this one model, but I certainly wouldn't sort of rush to the stores for it or anything, or scour eBay and go out of my way very far to get it. But the one fighter, Khacharik, is pretty interesting. Now getting into the Dread Pageant, they only have four fighters, but all four of them are pretty amazing. Really glad, especially because Sybarites, Slaanesh Sybarites, the mortals in Slaanesh, they kind of needed the help. And all four are pretty amazing. So Vasilak is a lot like kind of in between an Ego Pomp and a Lord of Pain. Um, the Lord of Pain has the 2-inch reach. The Ego Pomp is a little closer in terms of stats. Um, but he's a little more points efficient than they are. He doesn't get the sweet ability that they have, um, but he is a really solid leader. Slake Slash, though, really incredible. If you look, he's got the 6-inch movement, and he just does a ton of damage. He can do 10 damage on average to toughness 3 models. So it works out to like a significantly higher than 50% chance to one-shot kill anything that's sort of in the sort of chaff range, which just makes him this really terrifying presence on the board, and only for 195 points. Hadzu is 110 points. They are really interesting. I think they're a little bit less powerful than maybe the other three, but you have double the damage of Bliss Barb Archers for only 30 more points, right? 80 points versus 110 points. Um, that's going to be really interesting, really often worth taking. Now, you aren't really taking archers for their damage output anyway, right? Part of what makes archers useful, really you're taking them because they're the cheapest thing you've got for sort of rounding out the numbers in your warbands, but they're more useful for just like their speed and then getting to a place and then maybe doing some damage here and there once they've gotten there. Um, Now, Hadzu does have that speed. 5-inch move is kind of nice, to go along with the 15-inch threat range. And he actually, or they, sorry, are just like an actual threat, in terms of their real damage. But um, not always what you take in that role. So really interesting. I think you're going to want to like play with Hatsu a little bit more to really figure out how powerful they are. Glisette is amazing. She's probably point for point the best fighter available to Slaanesh mortals. Um, she has she's a small piece, so it's not going to sort of revolutionize the faction, right? Because you can only take one Glisette. Um, but with 2-inch reach and really great damage for the points, right? I mean, look, almost as much damage as Vasilak is putting out for almost half the number of points that you pay for Vasilak. Now, Glisette is much more vulnerable, much more easy to kill than a lot of things that do the same. But that 2-inch reach, right, that long spear, Glisette's going to be able to use that to kind of hold off opposing fighters. Um, you know, Set in 2 inches away, attack them. They're going to have to get a really, um, inefficient attack back. 12 hit points is usually enough to survive one hit from almost anything in the game. And then, you're just going to go to town once you get a double attack. The ability for the Dread Pageant is kind of weak. It is going to be better than Rampage if you're stuck in a drawn out combat, right? So if you're starting the round in combat with something and it's something big that you're not going to kill in 2 activations, um, then it's better than Rampage, right? Because otherwise, if you kill it in 2 attacks, you'd rather use Rampage to then just get another movement and then go kill something else. But this one, so normally you would use dice on, say, something like Slake Slash, something really powerful and big and scary. This is going to be actually more useful probably on Glisette. I can't imagine Slake Slash being in combat with a lot of things that he can't take out in 2 hits. Whereas Glisette might happen, and then all of a sudden she can take out some of the biggest units in the game once she's using this ability. And just to note, the ability is just 1 extra activation in combat. If both you and the enemy fighter have taken a damage, you get 3 extra attacks, which is really strong. But again, very situational compared to when you'll use it over Rampage. Now, Grashrak's Despoilers is a really exciting warband. Just because Grashrak himself is so interesting. This mage stat line of 2 attacks, 3 strength, and then 3 and 6 damage isn't very exciting. If you're attacking something with 4 toughness, which is a huge percentage of the game, you have a 44% chance of just doing no damage at all. So I don't know if you saw, but Vortimus has the same stat line. You're going to see others with the same stat line. It's just an awful, almost at any points level, it's just an awful um, shooting attack to have. Now, Grashrak does do more respectable damage, sort of just in melee, so that might be something you do more often. But again, you're really not taking him for the damage. You're taking him for um, the abilities. So it has the same kind of pull on a double as the regular Beast of Chaos Shaman does, where it can sort of pull an enemy fighter towards you, which can really mess up the opponent on treasure missions, on objective missions, even on hunter missions where you're trying to get them away from the thing they're trying to kill. And it also has an incredible paralyze ability on a quad, where if you get a quad, you can deal damage equal to the value of the ability, and then also roll a dice, and on a 2-up, they can't do anything for their activation, which is just amazing. It's a lot like the Contorted Epitomes ability. I know that one's on a triple, this is on a quad, but this comes with some damage, and for a triple, that was way overpowered anyway, so even on a quad, this is really strong. Some other interesting notes on this warband, you do get a lot of tools for your Beasts of Chaos Warcry warbands that come with it other than just Grashrak. Korsh and Morgoth are better than normal Gores. I do think, or sorry, better than normal Ungors. Gores probably are going to be better most of the time just because of that 55 points is just so low. But still, Korsh and Murgoth are really solid fighters, and it's something where if you have 10 points left in your list, you're going to be happy to include them over a regular Gore. Draknar is also better than a normal Bestigor. Now, that's the guy with the big axe. Bestigors are kind of these all-around mid-sized fighters. You almost would never take more than 2 of them in a warband, but putting in one Draknar can be tempting sometimes. I wouldn't take it in the most competitive lists, but for fun games, I would 100% play Draknar. Um, Ushgor and Norin are a little bit worse than Ungor Raiders, point for point, but Raiders are amazing, so an upgrade would have probably been too much. Um, the only thing, so they pay a little bit extra points for 2 hit points, and 2 hit points isn't that useful on a tiny archer because um, you're keeping them out of combat anyway, so they're kind of the last things your opponent actually fights. So you're just not going to get a ton of mileage out of those 2 hit points. So into Garruk's Reavers. Um, Really sweet. This is actually the only one that I already have, so I'm really excited to play these guys. Now, I was using them as regular Blood Reavers for my chaff models for my Bloodborne, or sorry, yeah, Blades of Khorne warbands before, but I'm still excited to play them, and I'll probably grab myself some other Blood Reavers to do it later. Um, the cool thing about Garruk's Reavers is Karsus. Karsus is just a totally unique fighter. There's no one else really like him in the game. He's got this range 3, he's mid-sized. So, for example, Slaves to Darkness has Marauders, which um, some people really swear by, where they just move 4 inches. So Karsus is a little better moving 5, but they have that 3-inch reach, which really lets you outmaneuver your opponent. You can put all these sort of overlapping circles of damage so that if your opponent takes one step the wrong way, all of a sudden 5 different models are attacking them. Karsus has that same thing, except you can only take one Karsus, in a warband. Um, but he's still really versatile. He has an interesting ability, sort of a horde clearing ability that isn't strong enough. You just do half the value of the dice to everything around you. Not strong enough to be sort of the reason you would take a model, but an interesting piece of sort of extra utility for something you might take anyway. And the threat range is really important. Being able to smack something 8 inches away is really nice, especially in a warband that's sort of almost entirely ground based. Um, absolutely worth testing in your Blades of Corn warbands. My algorithm that I use to evaluate some of these things at a glance isn't very kind to Karsus because for 135 points, you can often get things that do a lot more damage. But I think it's unkind in general to pieces that are really unique in the game, and Karsus is certainly that. The others in this warband are pretty respectable, though they're not game breaking. Sayic is a really interesting, just kind of glass cannon of a piece. Great onslaught target, right? Anything with sort of 4 strength, 3 damage, 5 crit is going to be really amazing. He's only got 3 attacks, so all of that damage is coming out of very few attacks. You add 1 with onslaught, and you're really doing something. Um, just a very fragile piece, so if your opponent knows what's up, they might target Sayic first. Um, so you're just going to have to watch out for that. Arnulf and Targer are 15 points for 2 extra hit points over regular Reavers. I just got done talking about why that wasn't very valuable with Ungor Raiders. Um, for Blood Reavers, that's a little bit better because Blood Reavers are rushing into the fight right away. So it's less of a waste of points there. I still think you would take regular Reavers over them, but it's certainly something where having extra points at the end of your list building, you'd be happy to spend them on Arnulf or Targer. Garrek is interesting. It's an expensive Blood Reaver chief, but he's got quite a bit of extra durability, a whole extra toughness, a couple more hit points, and he's got an okay damage buff that is. Um, Actually, hold on. Let me just do the math real quick, and then I'll get back to you. Ooh, sorry for the long wait. I'm sure that took forever. Um, Garrick has if you onslaught on him, it's sort of an average of just 1 extra point of damage per activation. But Garrick's damage buff is about twice that if you roll a 5 or a 6, or it's like 1 1/3 damage per attack on average uh, for a 3 or a 4. So, pretty small, but it is a little better than Onslaught, and Onslaught and Rampage run this game, so having anything that's better than Onslaught in just some situations is always interesting and worthwhile. All right, so the Godsworn Hunt. This is another one with a really interesting sort of wide variety of uses to it. Thedra has that really unfortunate attack stat line of 2, 3, 3, 6. Again, 44% chance she's just going to do nothing a lot of the time. These mages are defined by their abilities, and Thedra's is really disappointing. Um, so it's really too bad because Thedra has an amazing sculpt, but the rest of the warband just has a lot of really interesting stuff that if you play Slaves to Darkness or you're thinking about it, you'd absolutely be interested in trying, I think. Olo is an archer, which that warband doesn't have a lot of great access to, so that's kind of nice. Kind of middling on his own compared to other archers of the same points value, but combos really well with Grawl, so that can be worth it. Um, on his own, compared to Hadzu, Hadzu has the exact same points cost, but does more damage and moves further. So then Jagathra, she's the the spear holder, and then Grawl, who's the is he cat or dog? Oh, like little panther guy. Uh, the Little Panther Grawl is a really interesting piece with the combo with Olo. Um, Olo can give Grawl a bonus move, and Grawl already moves pretty fast, and so they can give you kind of this little torpedo across the field, which can be really useful and catch your opponents off guard. Grawl's a bit of a glass cannon, really easy to kill, um, but you know, with that movement and really good damage, can be a really interesting little combo that you have around the board. Um, so then Jagathra has this little javelin throw that actually not unique to her. Marauder Horsemen have it as well, though the stats on Marauder Horsemen are really rough, so you probably wouldn't take those. Jagathra is really cheap, so the fact that you can, uh, take her for not very much. It's really a tiny investment in your warband. She's got the range 2, which is always useful just in regular fighters anyway, and then the ability to kind of throw the spear 6 inches to, sometimes take a fighter out, sometimes deal actually pretty surprising damage because you have a 1/3 chance of doing the full dice roll. So you could do like 5, 6 damage in a 1/3 chance. Just an interesting little utility piece that's, not going to revolutionize how you play Warcry, but is just a really nice little thing to add. Gives some extra depth to the game that I like. Grundon and Shand is just classic GW. They cost the same amount of points, right? 105. One having 4 attacks, 3 strength, one having 3 attacks, 4 strength. Shand is better. Number of attacks almost always maths out to being more than added strength. Even against higher toughness units, Shand usually is doing more damage. Now, Khagra's Ravagers, we've gotten to the last one. Really, again, interesting stuff to look at, right? Khagra is one of now like 100 different Slaves to Darkness beat stick leaders. Does solid damage, but Slaves to Darkness has so many options here. Some of them are worse than Khagra, some of them are a little bit better than Khagra. She kind of sits in a different value points-wise than a lot of those do, so that can be valuable. Um, Really, where Khagra might have the most value is actually as Zarshia's sidekick, which is really funny given that Khagra's the leader and Zarshia, is famously the jealous sister in this warband, according to their um, in the lore that they give you. But again, Zarshia has this awful stat line, just like every other mage does. Hers is even worse, actually, doing 1 less on the crit. However, like I said, all these mages are defined by their abilities, and hers is amazing. She has a double, totally useless, ignore it. Um, However, her um, triple is even better than the Cypher Lord's Shadowy Recall triple. She can teleport any of her friends that are 12 inches away and put them somewhere 6 inches away. So there are so many uses to this. One, you can just throw something towards an objective, right? So let's say you've got, one of your slow little Chaos Warriors is just on the wrong side of the board, but still within 12 of Zarsha. All of a sudden you move her so that she's 6 inches on the board elsewhere. You've moved, say, Kragan or Khagra 18 inches across the board with just one ability. You can do that. You can also teleport them into combat, which is something you can't do in Age of Sigmar, right? So sometimes people coming over to Warcry miss that you can do that. You sure can. So that's really useful where, say, the other person has maybe overcommitted a little bit with um, their most important piece. You maybe move Zarsha up, shoot at it once, and then teleport one of your warriors into combat with it. Now, it only works with um, fighters that are in the warband. So Khagra, Razak, and Kragan are the only things that she can teleport. So it's not as good as, say, the Slann Star Master's ability to do this, but still really amazing. Um, so then we get into the normal Chaos Warriors that come with the Warband. The first one being Razak. Razak is a huge improvement over the Chaos Warrior with Shield. It shows that, and there's some other things in some other supplements that GW has put out has showed that they're kind of looking at toughness and how it might be overcosted a little bit. Razak is paying significantly less for his way too much toughness. So is Khagra, by the way. She's got 6 toughness, and her points efficiency isn't nearly as bad as they've done on other 6 toughness models. Um, Razak is still bad, unfortunately, but not quite as embarrassingly bad as the old Shield Chaos Warrior was. So Razak, you can at least play with a straight face, even though he's pretty bad. And I think that's progress, right? Uh, Kragan, again, minor improvement over a regular, whoopsies, minor improvement over a regular Chaos Warrior. Um, Still not amazing, but absolutely something you can play, and absolutely something where you're going to be really tempted to play this warband, just probably remove Razak, and then put Kragan and Khagra in 2 different deployment groups, and then just have Zarsha being able to um, teleport either one of them, just kind of to really mess with the opponent. And that's going to be a really solid strategy that can be really annoying for your opponent, and I think will make for some really fun games. I'm actually really excited to pick up Bladeborn, just for the fact that I'm going to be able to kind of pull off some really cool tricks with some really classic sculpt models, right? Because Khagra's Ravagers is kind of famously one of the most beautiful warbands that they've done in the game. Um, so let's do our list building extravaganza. I am so excited for this because, like I said before, Bladeborn is going to completely revolutionize playing Warcry for budget-minded players. This is the game. Warcry is now the game where, kind of fulfilling the promise that it's always been making of a way to play just classic, fun, Warhammer uh, without having to think too hard and without having to spend too much money. Um, Underworlds, great in terms of sort of budget entry for the first game you play, but then needing to buy all the ones to get all the cards can be really rough. Um, Big progress with Harrow Deep on that. If I ever get to a Harrow Deep event, I'll certainly let you know how it goes. But um, you can now take any two uh, Underworlds warbands that are in here, and they fit to make a perfect combo. So let's get into some of them. Now, if you just take the Bladeborn box, right, because that's going to be at Barnes and Noble for $60, um, you can do Khagra's Ravagers and the Godsworn Hunt together in a Slaves to Darkness warband, and it'll work great. Um, Khagra is going to be the leader because Thedra, again, like I said, kind of unplayable, unfortunately. Um, Sorry, Thedra. But then you're going to have Olo, Jagathra, and Grawl because they're all amazing. They all have this interesting sort of utility potential. And then Shand and Grunden, again, Grunden, pretty terrible. Shand is great. Um, then you'll have Zarshia, Razak, and Kragan. This is the thing where if you had any other Slaves to Darkness stuff, you might just take out Razak and put something else in, anything really. But otherwise, this is going to be a really solid warband. You know, 8 fighters, lots of tricks. Um, going to be great. If you want to proxy in Thedra in for Zarsha, just pretend that, they had a mind swap or something. I'm sure your opponent's going to be fine with that. Some other really cool two-box combos, though, because this will be something where the rules in it let you experiment elsewhere. You can do this kind of Slangor party. There's a couple different versions of it, but the Dread Pageant plus Grashrak's Despoilers are, I think, really solid because they're probably the two most powerful um, single boxes that you can get out of this new rule set. So playing, Vasilek, Slake Slash, and Glisset, along with Grashrak and all of Grashrak's friends, or most of Grashrak's friends. You can do it a few different ways. One is this kind of tricksy version where you keep Grashrak, uh, you drop the what is it, Drakkar, and so you have a little bit less fighty power, but you can pull off a ton of different abilities, and you still have Slake Slash and Vasilek to do your fighting damage. You can also kind of get rid of Grashrak. You don't have the pull, you don't have the paralyze, but now every single fighter does kind of above the curve damage for its points, and that can be really solid too. Um, Another pretty powerful one that you can do is Grashrak's Despoilers plus the Godsworn Hunt. What makes this one really solid is that you have 10 fighters, which, if you've played a bunch of Warcry, uh, having sort of a large amount of numbers in this game can be really valuable on most missions. I think like maybe about 80% of the missions kind of reward you for having more numbers than your opponent. Um, so having 10 fighters can be really good in a warband, and Grashrak's Despoilers kind of lets you do that, and then you still have the disruption in Grashrak, but you also have um, some other stuff too, and then Olo, Jagathra, and Grawl, like I said before, just really great utility pieces to have everywhere. Um, you have 3 archers in this warband, which is really nice for a lot of situations. So a lot of versatility and a lot of bodies. A really solid two-box combo that I think you can get a ton of mileage out of. Also, both of these two situations give you a ton of really cool options as far as like unique paint schemes to paint the two warbands to look like they're on the same team, even though the design is really different. You could figure out color schemes that really make them look unified. Um, Another thing you can do is sort of oops all Blood Reavers. Now, Blood Reavers in Khorne are really solid, and one thing though with a Blood Reaver Warband, all Blood Reaver Warband is it doesn't make for the most well-rounded experience because you're kind of lacking heavy hitters, you only do one thing. But adding in Garrek's Reavers is really nice because Saïx and Karsus are just really interesting pieces that do really unique things, right? Saïx having huge burst damage, Karsus having a ton of sort of um, area control utility. Those are going to go a long way towards making your all Blood Reaver Warband uh, play with some real interest to it, with some real versatility to it that it otherwise wouldn't do. And then, of course, having 6 Blood Reavers is just like one of the more powerful chaff units in the game. Not maybe in the top tier, but just like one notch below. Just a really good piece that you can make great warbands out of. So this is something that Blood Reavers kind of pretty expensive buying from straight from GW, but they're all over the place on eBay. There have been so many people who have bought massive Khorne armies only to find out that Khorne's not very fun in Age of Sigmar, and then selling all their Blood Reavers. And there's also been a ton of people who have bought the starter set that comes with 10 Blood Reavers and realized that they prefer Blood Warriors because, maybe they think they look cooler or whatever. And then they ended up focusing on Blood Warriors for their army and just kind of left the Blood Reavers and sold them on eBay. And so Blood Reavers are really cheap on eBay compared to where you would get them retail. So you can, if you're willing to kind of shop around for deals, you can absolutely get this warband for dirt cheap. I think that's incredibly exciting. I think that's one of the best things to come out of this sort of rules update. You can also kind of quote unquote get Slaanesh on a budget for kind of the first time. So for example, the Dread Pageant plus a box of Bliss Barbs can be really solid. You would probably play all of them except for Olo. Um, just the 3 of them, then a bunch of Bliss Barb archers. Uh, I would run Vasilak as a Lord of Pain just because the points work out easier here. You get that extra ability, which I think is worth it if you have the extra points. I do think Vasilak might be point for point probably a little better than a Lord of Pain, but if you have the extra points, you would probably make the upgrade. And I don't think generally people would be mad at you for doing it. Um, so you're going to have a really solid warband if you do just get the Dread Pageant plus a box of Bliss Barbs. The other option is the Dread Pageant plus a box of Fiend Bloods. Now, this gives you a warband that is only 6 deep, right? So not a ton of bodies. Basically, you're playing like your Stormcast, but every unit is a badass, which is something most Stormcast warbands can't say. Every single unit in the Dread Pageant box is really powerful on its own. Fiend Bloods are really powerful on their own. Slangor Slaykhorns, which are the Fiend Blood boss, are really powerful on their own. 3 of your fighters in this warband are move 6 monsters between Slake Slash, the Slaykhorn, and the Fiend Blood. And then Vasilak is a real beatdown kind of guy. As well, especially with that 2-inch reach. Glissette, point for point, is incredible. She's still the most powerful fighter in this group here. Um, and then, Hadzu is shooting people from afar. That's always useful to have. I think as far as 6 model warbands go, this one's one of the best in the game. It's just that, just having 6 models, like I said before, about 80% of the missions kind of punish you for having not very many models. On the 20% or so that don't, this is going to be an amazing warband. And, even on the ones that do, it's going to feel like you're sort of against the odds in a really fun way, um, in a way that can be fun with Stormcast warbands, but with a totally different play style than Stormcast plays with. And I think that's really awesome. Finally, we've got Khagra's Marauders. So if you get Khagra's Ravagers plus a box of Marauders or Marauder proxies, because a ton of different places have, um, it's their own sort of evil-looking barbarian sculpts. If you do that, I think you have an amazing warband, especially if you do Marauders with flails, because Marauders with Flails have that crazy board control where they run everywhere. They've got that 3-inch reach, putting these sort of big sort of circles of influence out there where you just have like basically the entire board covered as far as something you can attack. Um, and you just get so many of them, which is really powerful. And then your ability to, with Zarshia, just like teleport Khagra or Kragan around anywhere on the battlefield that you want. That's just going to be really sweet. I think this is a really strong warband in terms of the tricks you can do, in terms of the your access to sort of the number of bodies that you have on the board. I think, if you went to an event and at your local game store and your opponent was playing this warband, I think you'd really have your hands full almost no matter what kind of thing you were playing yourself. So again, a really powerful thing, setup that you can do for incredibly cheap, whether it's even getting them, from a regular GW retailer or finding them kind of third party, whichever way you do it, it's going to be really cheap compared to a lot of other ways you can get into the game, and it's going to be really powerfully cheap. So, um, all of this is really making me want to redo my budget tier list video because I do think that some of these quote unquote budget, quote unquote in the Slanesh case, but some of these budget warbands are, I think, really powerful and really change the game in terms of what you can achieve in terms of like really tuned warbands that are super cheap to get into. And I can't wait for more Underworld sculpts, really changing the game as far as that goes. So that was a bunch. I feel like I gave a ton of lists in that video and I still barely scratched the surface in terms of what you can do. And that's only with 6 additions to the game. There's even more Chaos Warbands that they haven't put out, right? They didn't put out the Skaven one. They didn't put out the Nurgle one. They didn't put out, there's one other, oh, the second Khorne one they didn't put out. So, um, once we start getting rules for even more Underworlds warbands in this game, it's going to open up the list building sort of phase in Warcry to an incredible extent, I think, because the way that you ally Underworld's warbands into your warband is sort of you can take any of them in faction, or you can take a leader and then any of their minions, as long as you have the leader, if you're in a different faction, but same Grand Alliance. So, Warcry is an incredible game as far as just like efficiently, casually playing on its own. But one of its weaknesses is that in the list building phase, uh, there's a little less depth to it than, say, you know, even other skirmish games sometimes, like Kill Team has a little more list building depth in certain places, um, although not with all of the compendium kill teams. But things like AOS or 40K have a ton more, and Magic the Gathering has like exponentially more, right? Underworlds has a lot more. So adding all this variety into Warcry, I think really is going to make it stronger, and I think also give you more tools to kind of change your warband. I think one of the things I would really love to see more of is the kind of rock paper scissors matchups type of stuff that you can see in really solid strategy games where it can be in a great game, it's impossible to create a list that another list can't beat. Um, Whereas, right now in Warcry, sort of at the top end, there is a little bit of that. For example, Skaven is the scariest warband in the game, but uh, Ogre Maw Tribes kind of beats it. Um, and then, you know, Ogre Maw Tribes is kind of soft to a contorted epitome. So there is sort of movement at the top, but it's still a lot more solvable than I think most games are. And, if we had a ton of tournaments, who knows, what we would see. So, um, all of that is just to say that putting all these Underworlds warbands in the game would just be amazing if we get more than just these 6, giving you different tools to accomplish different tasks, sort of attack different matchups with different warbands, right? Having tools that are really strong against one type of list that are weak against another, that kind of stuff is what makes strategy games get a lot of replayability. And so I'm really happy to see them add all this depth to the game, and we'll see what comes next. Hopefully, Red Harvest has a lot of fun in store for us. Until then, may all your rolls be crits.